A very warm welcome to the participants of the Proteomics Advanced Winter School 2021. Presented by Proteomics Lab, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Day 1. Introduction to Proteomics. Lecture 2. Recent Innovations in Proteomics.
I'm going to talk to you today about recent innovations in proteomics. So it is going to be much broader than just mass spectrometers, but I want to give you the flavor of how the last 15 years or so, how the proteomics field have really evolved very strongly. So broadly, the entire field of proteomics is of course technology driven, and different type of instrumentation, different technologies are really helping us to investigate this complex and very dynamic proteome. And that's where there are many technologies which are quite helpful in the process. And we can broadly group them in discovery proteomics or functional proteomics. So discovery proteomics, as Dr. Shrikant already showed you, involves technology like conventional two-dimensional electrophoresis or mass spectrometry-based approaches, which involve series of quantitative and targeted approaches as well. In the functional proteomics, your aim is to look at the function of the protein, and you want to just go beyond identification and quantification. So there are different type of technologies that are being used to characterize the function of unknown proteins or to better understand a given protein and their function using protein microarrays, the different type of biosensors, especially the surface plasmon resonance and biolayer interferometry, BLI. Some of these platforms are quite useful for protein-protein or protein-drug interactions. So Human Proteome Organization is the key organization who is driving various innovations and the field of proteomics. And of course, Proteomics Society of India, we are trying to accelerate the effort to increase the knowledge base in our subcontinent here. But I'd like to give you at least a very quick recap of what has brought in, which made this field of proteomics so strongly. So recently, as an activity from Human Proteome Organization, we had released this video, which is the HUPO timeline. Let me take this opportunity to quickly show you that video first, and then I will follow some of the major innovations. All right, a long journey of proteomics field is shown in almost three and a half minutes time. So, I'd like to recommend you to go to this website on hupo.org and go to the proteomics timeline, and each of those innovations and discovery have been described in much more detail. So if you click on those, it will walk you through with the actual papers and more information about each of these innovations. So this could be really informative for all the students who are entering into this new field and want to really learn about all the innovation which has happened in the time scale in the proteomics field. So large number of scientists from the HUPO are highly acknowledged who have contributed towards all these documenting these discoveries and contributing towards this HUPO timeline. So let me first start. So in my presentation, I will have three segments. First, I will talk to you about some of the recent innovations which has happened as a result of initiatives from the Human Proteome Project, and especially development of draft human proteome maps. Second, I will talk to you about the technological innovations, especially some of the more recent innovations in the field of proteomics. And third, I will talk to you about broadly what has made the field of omics much more applicable to various innovations happening in front of us, and which is really going to make huge impact in the future. Let me first start with the human proteome maps and the Human Proteome Project. So as I'm sure some of you who have already started knowing about the proteomics field are aware that after the completion of Human Genome Project, which happened in 2002-2003, the focus was how to map all the proteins of a given human and look at the building the draft human proteome map like the Human Genome Map, which was already published. And it took almost 14 years, to catch up to that journey. But in 2014, two different groups, one from Dr. Akhilesh Pandey from Institute of Bioinformatics and Johns Hopkins University, they published in Nature the draft human proteome map, and Dr. Bernhard Kuster's group from Germany, they also published in the same issue of Nature the draft human proteome map. Along with, there were some other studies that in the MCP, and other contributions also came forward based on the tissue-based human proteome, which was developed by Dr. Matthias Uhlén and his team in 2015. So while the Pandey group as well as the Kuster group, they used mass spectrometry-based approach to profile every organ of a human and different cell lines, and trying to build the human proteome database and the first ever draft human proteome maps. But Dr. Matthias Uhlén group, they first time showed about how at the antibody level, one could confirm the protein presence and their localization by using immunohistochemistry and tissue arrays. They first time made this tissue-based draft human proteome. So both of these are the major milestone which has happened very recently. I'm sure all of you at some stage were student. Looking at these information, I think the first major application of this is that you want to have the database which is having authentic peptide sequences from the mass spectrometer. So far, for all your searches, when you are going to look for databases, you are going to rely on the human genome map and the draft sequences from the genome level and looking at their translation. But if you have the evidence at peptide level directly, then you are very confident that this is the right protein which you are searching for. So of course, these are the very valuable resources to build the databases. So the major effort of Human Proteome Organization has been to build the, not only looking at the further activities in the draft human proteome, but also to accelerate the knowledge of the field of proteomics broadly. So there are four major pillars in the HPP, Human Proteome Project, which involves the mass spectrometry-based pillar shown on the left side here, looks at the knowledge base, essentially looking at the bioinformatics and the databases, antibody-based approaches, like the one which I showed you for Dr. Ulhans and the the Human Protein Atlas team is developing, and more recently added this pathology pillar, which is looking at how to do the clinical translation of these identified proteins and biomarkers, which could be eventually helpful for the therapeutic and clinical interventions. So the major activities of HUPO and HPP revolves around two major initiatives. One comes from the chromosome-centric Human Proteome Project, the CHPP. Other comes from the biology or disease-driven HPP, which is known as BD-HPP. And as you can see that, this is shown on the x-axis, different chromosomal teams. On the y-axis, different type of BD-HPP teams are there, which is leading different type of disease problems. And chromosomes were given to different countries to map that, which is already completed now. Biology and disease is, of course, very difficult to understand. A lot of efforts are actually going on to identify the mutant peptides, the popular proteins, where proteins are modified, which proteins are the most relevant biomarkers, and all of those activities are taking forward in this initiative. So this is actually a very nice way of combining the knowledge from different expertise, different scientists, and different countries. Let me also take this opportunity to highlight that while proteomics in India is not very old, but the contributions of Indian scientists to proteomics field has been really immense. And as you have seen the draft human proteome map, many scientists from IOB Bangalore under Dr. Pandey's group were involved. The CHPP activities were quite leading by Dr. Ravi Sardeshmukh. BDHPP, my group has been quite actively involved. And if you think about the tissue-based proteome map, the Max Excellence work, that's where Dr. Sanjay Nawani from Mumbai, one of the medical doctor and pathologist, his team was quite actively involved in annotating many of these images, which they were generating from Sweden, and then a large number of pathologists sitting in Mumbai were analyzing all those slides. So I'm sure you'll be delighted to see that, in many of these activities, at least India has already made significant contribution in all of the possible outcomes so far, which has happened. So while the field of mass spectrometry is evolving very rapidly, and there are many innovations happening, now doing proteomics has become much easier, because now you can just take a complex protein mixture from any given sample type, any organism, and just after doing digestion, you can put in the mass spectrometer, generate shotgun proteomics data set. So generating data has become very easy, but at the same time, now the quality of the data has to also meet the stringent requirements. And that's where Human Proteome Organization provides periodically the guidelines of what is the good data which you should take forward, because you will generate several thousand to million peptide from that given experiment. But which of those you should choose for your further work, and which proteins you should report as the confident protein for your search. Those things are keep evolving guidelines, and Journal of Proteome Research and Molecular and Cellular Proteomics, MCP and JPR, they provide these kind of guidelines periodically. And so as on the HUPO website, you can find these. I think it's really important for all of you who are venturing into the research, into, just started doing something new. You should know the guidelines, because if you put so much of your time and effort of doing the activity and eventually you can't even publish good work from that, then I think it will be defeated exercise. So you should know that what is the best practices of analyzing your data. Of course, some of these things we will be keep covering as we go along, but now the idea is, given that we are not doing advanced sequencing type of work in the proteomics field, we are looking at only peptide sequences and the stretch of peptides of a given protein, which is going to be used for searching a database. So as a result, it should be minimum 2 unique peptides, which has to be there to be confident that this is coming from that one protein which you've identified. And these two should be based on at least 9 unique amino acid length of the peptide. So peptide cannot be 4, 5, 6 amino acid long. It should be, earlier it was 7 amino acid, but now they have made more stringent to make it 9 more. So minimum 9 amino acid length has to be there. And these should be non-nested. So it is not just the same peptide, you take it, 2 peptides of the same protein, but rather it should be separated, and 2 unique peptides, non-nested, which should be used as a criteria to narrow down the proteins which can be used. So again, some of these information, you should be keeping an eye on the evolving field and the guidelines of publications in the mass spectrometry. So given all this, criteria which has been evolving, and of course the 2014 work, both the draft human proteome maps published at that time has not followed that type of guideline, which has been continuously evolving. And so now there was a new need to look at the entire proteome data available in the NextProt, which actually filters all the data available from the community. And a large number of scientists under the leadership of Dr. Mark Baker from different countries. And fortunately, we were also involved from India side in this recent publication, which just came in Nature Communications. So first time we have reported the greater than 90% stringent, the human proteome map, which is representing this high stringent criteria of identifying the protein, and now greater than 90.5% proteome. We have the confirmatory evidence at the mass spectrometry and other type of data analysis. So as I said, the field is evolving very rapidly, and what you should be knowing about that, the way the criteria were made for looking at protein evidences, those have been grouped into the 5 different categories: protein evidence level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, known as PE1, PE2, PE3, PE4, PE5. PE1 is the most robust criteria when you'd like to make sure that all the mass spec guidelines which I mentioned to you have been met. And as a result, as now you can see that data from 2011 to 2020, now we have much larger number of protein for which the data exists at the PE1 level, almost for 17,874 proteins. And the next to that is the PE2, PE3, PE4, PE5 proteins, which are not as confirmatory as the PE1, but a different level of evidences exist for those proteins as well. And aim is to see how many of those we can provide more experimental evidences and bring them to PE1 level. And some of these interesting results and finding you can get in this paper, which is from Subhash Adhikari and the group, which is published in this Nature Communication recent paper. Based on these analysis, what is still, many of you who are starting new should not feel disappointed that what you are going to do. So I must say that, interesting story that in 2002, at the time when the draft human genome projects were getting completed, I was finishing my master's at that time. And I was really worried that, now this whole field is already done. All the secrets of human life is getting unraveled. What research I'm going to do? Because I was quite keen in looking into, the omics field. So, but, to the surprise, as soon as those papers got published, it opened a new field that now, we have information that, the human genome is not very different than monkey, chimpanzee, and another organism. And also the number of human genes are not very different as compared to Drosophila, C. elegans, Arabidopsis, other model organism. So that opened up new opportunity for the new field of proteomics to evolve right away. And of course, then I was very happy, and I really feel that I started on that trajectory from that time onwards. So likewise, many of you who are starting new should not feel disappointed that now the draft human proteome maps are done, all the secrets have been unraveled, and what you are going to do. Still, you have very exciting opportunities in the field, and also very tough opportunities to explore. For instance, there are still missing proteins, which is almost 1700 or so, which is not easy to identify. And this particular image on the top panel shows that there are different group of proteins, especially the olfactory receptors, almost 417 of those. There are transmembrane proteins, zinc finger proteins, various proteins which are keratin associated, GPCRs, and several proteins which is mentioned here, which also includes set of proteins on the Y chromosomes and testis and sperm prostate specific proteins. Many of these proteins are still missing. Although many of the missing proteins which were missing a couple of years ago, with the scientific community's various involvement and different approaches, now they have moved to the PG1 level in 2020, but still there is a lot of opportunity and tough opportunity to really explore the remaining less than 10% or so proteome. So please feel motivated that you have now tough task at hand, and you have to still contribute to this journey of unraveling even just the draft human proteome to make it complete human proteome map. So with that, I think you got some idea that how more recently in last, especially just last 5-6 years itself, so much has happened to know about the human proteome from the 2014 papers till 2020 papers. I hope you have seen the journey and also the evolving guidelines of looking at the mass spectrometry data set and the evidences of the protein looking at the PE1 level and the missing proteome, which is still quite hot topic and challenging topic in the field, right? So all that was not possible without advancements of various proteomics technology, which have really become advanced, much more robust over the time period, and that has really accelerated the field of proteomics. So one could, when proteomics comes, one could start conceiving variety of technologies, which is, in a complex figure like this, has shown conceptually to you to convey that there are a large number of technologies which are currently being used in the proteomics field, whether you are looking at developing the human proteome maps, which involve variety of mass spectrometers to different type of array platforms, or whether you're looking at clinical biomarkers discovery program, you want to validate proteins using targeted proteomics, you are moving ahead toward the precision medicine, or you are looking at how to transform your findings to the clinical translation. All of these revolve around variety of technologies, variety of proteomics approaches. So, but one thing which made the process very simple, and that was the transition and the shift from the discovery work to the from the gel-based approaches to the mass spectrometry approach, was the shotgun proteomics. And so at the time when the two-dimensional electrophoresis field from 1995 or so, with the invent of immobilized pH gradient strip or IPG strip was evolving, and then the field of dyes came at that time, differential electrophoresis, which involved different type of Psi dyes to label the protein. At the same time, scientists were exploring, can we separate the complex protein mixture without separating them on the gel? And that's where a technology named MUDPIT, multi-dimensional protein identification technology from John Yates' lab came forward, which showed that protein can be separated just by the, in different dimensions of the chromatography, like a strong cation exchange and reverse phase chromatography. And you can just take the complex proteome mixture, involve different chromatographic based dimension of separation, and then you can generate large number of peptide signatures from the given sample. And as you can see in this approach, you take a crude protein mixture, which you are going to now, in the process of digestion, you first start with the reduction and alkylation, and followed by enzyme like trypsin can be used for digestion, or you can use a cocktail like trypsin with the lyc or chymotrypsin, And then once you have digested these protein to the peptide forms, now you can do the desalting. You can clean these peptides and make sure that now you have the peptide which is clean, which can be taken forward for the LCMS based analysis. So now based on this concept that Dr. Shrikant has already briefed you, there are a variety of approaches which are quite important, which we'll be talking almost whole day today. And this complex but very informative figure from this paper is going to help you to understand some of these concepts. So in all of these field of mass spectrometry, proteomics, what we are talking, how you are going to take some precursors, which is most intense ions, and then you are going to fragment those, and then you are going to look at those fragments and do the searches based on those. So there are two broad terms comes here. One is data dependent acquisition, known as DDA. Other is data independent acquisition, known as DIA. So in the DDA, as you can see, among the various precursors which are coming, of course, you have electrospray ionization linked to the nano LC, and you have large number of peptides which are large number of ions which are moving in from the electrospray ionization. So now the with the scan speed, you can select only few intense precursors at a given time. So in this case, let's say a single precursor is selected, which is you have defined a threshold, most intense ions, which is getting fragmented, and now you are detecting all the fragment ions for that particular intense precursor. Or you can define multiple precursors, and all of those are getting fragmented, and you are aiming to detect all the fragment ions for all those precursors. So this is a major difference from the DDA versus DIA. And the the same concept could also be applied for when you talk about targeted proteomics, when there could be two approaches majorly. One is known as multiple reaction monitoring, or MRM. Other is PRM, or parallel reaction monitoring. MRM being done on more triple quadrupole type of mass spectrometers, and PRM being done especially on the Orbitrap kind of instruments. So in MRM approach, you are looking at single precursor selection, fragmenting that, and then you are looking at the further fragment ions from that particular precursor. In PRM, you are aiming to look at again the precursors at the time, but you want to look for all the maximum precursors for which you can detect the fragment ions, which could be used for your the entire validation strategy, which could be linked to all the proteins or peptides of interest. So this is the concept which we'll be talking again and again today. And based on some of these concepts, there are different type of labeling strategies have come forward, which involves as Dr. Shrikant mentioned, the either you are going to tag your proteins or especially peptides using the tags like TMT or iTrack, or you can also use the label-free quantification methods. So both iTrack, isobaric tag for relative and absolute quantification, or tandem mass tags, TMT, both look at peptide level at the N-terminal sequence, and they are able to do multiplexing. So there is a radical shift from moving from the gels and the 2D approach or DIGE approach, or even one of the initial labeling strategy, which was based on IECAT, isotope coded affinity tag. These isobaric tags have really moved forward the entire field of quantitative proteomics. So in this approach, now if you could see how best we could look into labeling strategies. So here we have, let's say 8 samples which we want to label. And these samples are, either you can go even up to now 14 plex with the TMT labels, or you can go 10 plex with the iTrack labels. So those, you are labeling separately the peptides from each condition, but then you are going to mix them together and then going to separate at the MSMS level and looking for those reporter ions to look for the quantitation, that what is the abundance of the given peptide across all my conditions. So unlike the strategy which is specifically looking at labeling of the peptides, one could also do the label-free quantification, where you are going to look at the spectral count of these peptides, how many spectra of the given peptide is present in my control condition and test condition, and accordingly I can quantify that what is the fold change of that given peptide in the protein in a given sample, right? Data independent acquisition has been utilized by different approaches, including SWAT and more recently with the Orbitrap technology as well. So just to simplify this, these are some definition which I think will help you to understand these complex terminologies like DDA, which I talked to you, data dependent acquisition. When you are looking at the most intense peptide ions which you are selecting, that you're going to do fragmentation and analyze in the second mass analyzer, or data independent acquisition, which is you're looking at a very narrow mass window of the precursors. And for each of those narrow mass window, for example, for 400 to 1000 M by Z, you are going sequentially from the 400 to 500, 500 to 600, and likewise till 1000, and generating very high resolution data for each of those windows. So you're looking at the mass window, which could be stepped across the entire mass range to collect the MSMS data from all the precursors. So DIA is very innovative, very novel concept. Is still a field is evolving given the complexity of the data analysis which is required. Still the softwares are not very evolved. Recently, Rob Morridge and team has just shown a very nice paper comparing different softwares, how they can be used for DIA analysis. If you're intended to work in this area, you should refer to that recent Nature Communication paper. So based on these approaches of discovery work, which evolve, whether the label-based approaches or label-free approaches, and now you want to validate your proteins of interest. So most of the time, the proteomics scientists have been really challenged that how to now take their table, which is having 30, 40, 50 proteins, how to validate those and how to make sense of that data. And that's where most of the innovative ideas actually cannot reach out to the clinical translation because you are not able to validate your proteins. So the limitations of availability of good antibodies, good assays for measuring different enzyme activities, or different type of other tests which you can do to ensure that the protein which you have identified from discovery work is actually valid. Many of the good proteins do not reach out to the next level. And to overcome this, this field of targeted proteomics, where aim is to specifically look at peptides rather than looking at the entire protein and validate the protein. Why not look at the peptide sequences which we have identified from our discovery work of mass spec? So mass spec discovery work only looked at the specific peptide sequences, and those peptide sequences we are very confident that they can fly well in the mass spec. We can ionize them very well, and these are showing the abundance in my control versus the disease condition. So why not validate peptide alone rather than relying on the whole protein validation? And that is a radical concept, major change, which led to the field of targeted proteomics. As you can see, it was the method of the year in Nature Methods in 2013, and that has really transformed the validation strategies, very much possible now to do easily in your own lab, just using a triple quadrupole-based mass spectrometer. Again, briefly I gave you the concept, but a little more detail. Here you are looking at two major approaches depending on the instrumentation available. If you have the triple quadrupole type of mass spec, there are different configurations available, different type of vendors are having mass spectrometers, but the idea is that you need the quadrupole type of mass analyzers, and although name says triple quadrupole, but ideally what you can see in the first quadrupole and the third quadrupole are essentially having the 4 rods, which is the quadrupoles, but in between you have a collision cell, which is the misnomer Q2, but you have the collision cell, you don't have 3 set of rods for the Q1, Q2, Q3. But in the MRM, essentially for multiple peptides, which is now coming to, from your complex sample, you have already defined that which peptides are of your interest. So by using a software Skyline, you want to just select those peptides. You are going to define their which precursors you are going to look for, and what is the collision energy approximately. So from the previous data set, by making the library, now you can narrow down those, and now you are very focused into a list of these 30, 40, 50 peptides which you want to validate. And then you are only selectively screening those transitions, those peptides using triple quadrupole based mass spec. And as you can see, one of the peptide, this most abundant precursor is now picked up here and now getting further fragmented. And now what you are generating is the time versus ion intensity scale, different precursors for a given peptide. And again, there are evolving guidelines to look for what makes your serum assay very strong. And that's where you should be looking at the guidelines from the JPR and more recent from the HUPO to ensure that what you are going to measure, the targeted assays, those are meeting these guidelines which are currently available, which is quite a detail which we will talk probably in the afternoon session when we have the targeted proteomics talks. A complex version of the selected reaction monitoring, you can term as a PRM or parallel reaction monitoring, much more ambitious. Here, hope is that every peptide, every transition which we want to monitor, can we do them simultaneously parallel in the parallel reaction monitoring, which could only be done on the Orbitrap configuration. And so it means while MRM is going to look at selectively few transitions, here you are going to look at almost all possible transitions and going to look for the quantification values derived from these experiments. So this could be very rapid and very most effective, but still I think field is evolving. MRM has quite been evolved, so it's easy to actually optimize the MRM based assays. Let me just shift a little bit gear that proteomics is not only about mass spectrometers. Proteomics is heavily contributed by other technologies as well, which is contributing for understanding the protein function better. And there are a variety of microarray based platforms which are available. So protein microarrays are essentially protein or antibody or peptide are printed on the glass slide, on nitrocellulose membrane, or on the gold slide. And now you want to take those thousands of protein printed on the array or the chip platform to take forward for your clinical assays or different type of testing, looking at protein-protein interaction or how different type of biomarker could be explored, how substrate enzyme works, how different type of kinase phosphorylation activities work. So very different type of unique applications could be performed using protein arrays, which is actually many times not possible when you look into just mass spectrometry based approach. So here what I've showed, just insets of what are all possibilities for making the arrays. For instance, you can look at the first three, which is abundance based protein microarrays. Here we are looking at antibodies which have been printed on the chip, and these antibodies could be either direct labeling or in the sandwich assay with the secondary antibody, or you can take the tissue biopsies or the punches of that and use the antibody of the interest. For example, you are measuring PSA, prostate specific antigen, in a given cancer sample. So you are now going to look at anti-PSA antibody and want to measure that antigen level in these, from the tissue arrays or reverse phase protein arrays. So these are, you are trying to measure abundance of a given antigen using antibodies. Approach is quite powerful, but relies mainly on the availability of good quality antibodies. The function-based arrays are essentially looking at either proteins, purified, or peptide synthesized, which is the middle one, or you can also have the cDNA clones, which could be synthesized with the in vitro transcription translation mix, and then you can make the proteins using different chemistries, one known as NAPA, nucleic acid plural protein arrays, or mixed multiple spotting technique. Some of these are more recent advances, which is driving the field of microarrays and protein microarrays. Here aim is to, I cannot go in all the detail of each of these technology, but I'm trying to give you the overview that, in addition to mass spec, a parallel field also exists, which is very strong, which can do a lot of functional analysis, which is not possible from the mass spectrometers. All these type of array, which I have shown here, is relying on the very novel concept that you can take DNA and add the central dogma complex, which makes the transcription and translation on the chip itself. So you are going to add the in vitro transcription translation mix, which contains ribosome, contains T7 polymerase, amino acid mixtures, all of that, and provide the right incubation condition so that proteins can be synthesized on the chip itself. The first concept of protein in situ arrays came from He and Taussig, who looked at nickel NTA coating on the glass slide, followed by a protein which contains the histidine tag. And after the expression, now this protein can bind to the, with the histidine tag can bind to the nickel NTA coated chip. And this is how the cell-free expression can work. A refinement of that method further got published in 2004 with in Science with George Labatt and his group for NAPA, nucleic acid protobal protein arrays, where idea was you take the cDNA which contains a tag, for example, the GST tag or MIG tag, and then you have a capture antibody which is anti-capture reagent. For example, this is anti-GST antibody. If your tag was the GST tag, and after adding the in vitro transcription translation mix, if protein is synthesized which contains GST tag, it is going to bind to the capture antibody. This was very simple approach and showed, with the cost-effective manner also, you can do proteomics very well. Other approaches are like mixed multiple spotting technique, which is having the PCR product of your given PCR reaction. And on top of that, you also do second printing to add the in vitro transcription translation mix. And then you incubate that to make the protein. Or the approach that is known as DAPA, DNA arrays to protein arrays, where on one chip you have the DNA which you have immobilized. And then after you have a membrane which contains the in vitro transcription translation mixed submerged to that. And after putting those two together, you are able to do the in vitro transcription translation, which is going to make the protein. And now you keep the second slide, which is having the nickel NTA coating. And now this protein, which is diffusing out from that membrane, is going to get immobilized to the second glass slide, which is forming the protein arrays now. Or more recently, approach from Sigma came, which was, or sorry, Promega actually was the company who made the Hello tag arrays. And idea was that, one of the very strong tag, Hello tag, which makes a covalent interaction with the chloroalkanes, can we use that chemistry to have very strong binding and immobilization on the chip. And that could be used for the protein array screening. So while I do not want you to get, distracted with different terminologies and complexity, which I just described, but the simple idea is that there are variety of microarray based approaches are available, which involves from printing antibodies to peptides, purified protein, or even DNA in different forms. And one could make proteins from those and do the functional understanding of many of these problems. One of the popular application of using protein arrays are essentially to look at biomarker screening. If you think about mass spectrometry versus microarrays, if you have a complex sample like serum and you want to analyze in mass spectrometer, the mass spectrometer dynamic range is very narrow with 4 to 5 order of magnitude. Whereas what we are looking at now, the proteins present in the serum and plasma, those are almost 11 to 12 order of magnitude. Huge abundant proteins like albumin and IgGs, and very low abundant proteins. And many of the times, the most low abundant proteins are very interesting protein as the potential biomarker candidates. So how best to analyze the these kind of sample in mass spec? For doing that, you have to go through additional step of doing depletion, where you want to deplete out the most abundant proteins like albumin and IgGs, and only then you are ready for the extraction, followed by digestion, followed by analyzing in LC-MS based approach. So what you can see that you need sequential processing of the serum or plasma sample before you can generate any data from the mass spec. Whereas in case of protein arrays, now because dynamic, the order of magnitude is quite large here for signal detection, and all you need is maybe 1 or 2 microliter of your serum or plasma sample, dilute them in the buffer. Of course, depending on concentration, you need to choose different volumes. But then you can take this kind of arrays. In this case, let's say, let me give you an example of human proteome arrays, which contains all the human proteins of 18,000 or so. And then, you have the small volume of serum or plasma sample, which you have diluted in the buffer. And now you are just putting on the entire slide so that all the features printed are able to cover that particular biofluid. And from that, then you are looking at what is the abundance of, the human IgGs if you're looking at, or, different other biomarker which you want to investigate. And depending on those, now in a single shot with a very small volume, without sample pre-processing, you are able to screen thousands of protein in just a couple of hours time. So think about, for this kind of approach, especially looking at biomarkers from the serum or plasma, protein microarray has emerged as much more powerful approach as compared to mass spectrometry. But once you've identified a right protein of interest, and now you want to see whether this protein binds to a given drug, and can you use a given drug as an inhibitor to treat this particular disease by inhibiting this protein. So that's where the level-free biosensors like surface plasmon resonance, SPR, shown here, or BLI or other type of biosensors are quite useful. So in SPR, you have the gold slide on which you have immobilized your antibody, for example, here shown. And then you have a light source and a prism. And with the change in the refractive index of the medium, as the binding will happen here, you are going to see the sensorgram, which is showing you percentage reflectivity change because of the change in the medium, because of the physical binding of your protein and drug. And initially you have this kind of hump which shows the on rate or k small a, or at the end you can see the dissociation, which is off rate, which is k off. And of course in between you are reaching the steady state, and then you want to generate the dissociation constant k capital D to look at the off rate on rate of the binding. So not only like in the microarray experiment, you are only able to say that a binding is happening yes or no, but here you are able to say binding is happening yes, but with what affinity, what is my on rate, what is my off rate. And some of these information is very critical if you think about how the drugs work, right? You are feeling very sleepy, and but you are not able to sleep well, so you need a sleep pill. I wish you don't need, but in case you need that, so you want it to work very fast, right? So on rate has to be really quick because you want that drug to really work, but then it has to sustain for some time so that your sleep cycle is more effective. But on other hand, if you have if you are looking at the painkiller, you just want very quick relief. You don't want very sustained long relief, but you want very quick relief right away. So now you think about, in one case you want slowly, but the longer duration of the drug to be effective. In other case, you want very quick drug to be effective. So on rate and off rate is very important to decide that how a drug should really work. So a lot of pharma sector, they look into not only that binding is happening, but also how the biomolecular interactions can be governed with these kind of on rate, off rate, and the KD values. So these things you can do from a variety of biosensors. Also, we were developing some technologies using protein arrays and label-free biosensors when I was with Josh Rabat's group at Harvard. And some of the possible approaches are shown here, just giving you the feel that how you can integrate array type of platforms, looking at thousands of protein features, but also measure the signal in the label-free manner using different type of principles. Like a simple example here is the nano-wired sensor arrays, where if you look at the antibodies are printed on the nano-wired sensors, and if an antigen is binding, you can see a change in the conductance happening, right? And this is so useful, which is already being implemented, in one of the previous study from PNAS, which they showed that a viral particle can actually one could detect that on the metal detector in the airports, right? So in current situation of pandemic, like, for the COVID, if we have those right antibody, which could look at the viral antigens and, while people are coming, and if one could screen quickly on those, just by looking at the deflection, looking at conductance change, or looking at reflectance change, I think those could be very powerful ways of detection. But there are already some existing examples for at least this part of the array technology. So likewise, different principles are involved, looking at in the F-panel spectral reflectance imaging biosensors or nanohole arrays. SPR, I briefed you already, it is quite powerful. Carbon nanotube based arrays or planar waveguide arrays. All of these approaches are trying to involve the array type of concept, but in the more high throughput manner with the label-free technology. So again, you should keep an eye on these evolving field, because a lot can be done in a single experiment by generating this kind of data. So let me come to the third part, which is looking at omics-based revolution. So I'll not take much time on it. We'll keep talking whole day about how proteomics and omics technologies are making revolutions. But just to give you at least some important activity which needs mention here. One is proteogenomics, which is essentially how to integrate your data obtained from the proteomics field with the genomics data set obtained from the same sample. And that is really going to be important if you want to look at the effect of somatic mutations and looking at the modifications happening at the protein level, at the post-translational modification levels, and how those information could be utilized for identifying the therapeutic targets. A lot is happening in the field of proteogenomics field. A new field which is, like this has really got acceleration from the Cancer Moonshot project, which is, the term was given by Joe Biden, at that time, the vice president of US. Now he's, of course, the president of US. So he's somebody who understands the this field very well, and the terminologies of cancer moonshot and proteogenomics comes from his effort with the NCI, National Cancer Institute, which led to the consortium of ICPC, or International Cancer Proteogenome Consortium, to start. And now there are 13 countries, and from India, we are the 12th country which is partnered to ICPC program to look at cancer proteogenomic analysis, how it can be utilized for a different cancer type of Indian prevalence. Other omic technology, which definitely, or the initiative which requires mention, is the Wellness Project, or P4 Medicine, which has been initiated by Institute for Cell Biology in Seattle, Dr. Lee Hood and his team. They are, pioneers looking at the wellness index of the individuals. Idea is, why to analyze only when people are diseased and they have the problem? Why not look at the wellness index when people are actually healthy? And look at, the healthy individuals, their longitudinal samples, and profile them over the time period using metabolomics, proteomics, genomics, different, proteogenome analysis, as well as the clinical features which could be integrated to that. And they published this paper in Nature in 2017, which shows of 108 individuals, along with ISB, the company Arivale was involved to profile the individuals, to look at what are the personal dense dynamic clouds, which one could find as a unique signatures for these individuals. And can we use that to track if an individual is going to develop a disease? So you are making a prediction that this healthy individual might be prone for diabetes or cancer or heart disease, or something else might be going on, which might come in the future. And you have a checkpoint to take at least some precautionary measure beforehand. So this is something which is really evolving in different ways now, different countries, different projects. Other activity which got really big boost is IPOP study from Mike Schneider, integrative personalized omics profiling. And he's a pioneer of this field. He used his own sample to profile longitudinally for over 14 months. And what was a really interesting finding from this, his own sample showed that he could be diabetic, actually prone to diabetes, while he is very thin and a healthy person. So that showed the power of IPOP technology. And eventually, now they are doing HPOP, human personalized omics profiling, for the large number of individuals, a paper to watch, which will be coming very soon, to show that how different individuals' longitudinal sample can give us different type of information. So finally, what we see now, that is a good trend of just not getting restricted to one field, one technology. Look at the growing layers of information from different systems level. And if you have availability of the instrumentation and technologies, or many times if you have at least not own data, but publicly available data, which can complement your one data set at the transcriptome level with the proteome data, or proteome data with the metabolome data, it's good to build the layer and layer by layer information. It is going to be a really strong field in the future, coming under system biology, which is looking at computational modeling to make predictions about how an unknown behavior could be predicted from the known data set, which one could make these models. So I hope, in my three parts of the presentation, I am able to convey you the at least excitement which we are all going through in the field of proteomics. The proteomics has really come a long way from the initial draft proteome maps to the development of very high stringent human proteome. There are a lot of new innovations are happening in the mass spectrometry based technology, from DDA to DIA approaches or targeted assays, but also in the other field of microarrays and label-free biosensors. And finally, depending on what is our niche area which we would like to focus on, what is the question which you would like to address, there are different omics data set, omics technology, which could contribute, and they are actually contributing to the full extent now in the functional biology and translational research. So last, I'd like to highlight that we have published a couple of special issues where I was editor for this whole special issue, which gives you a good glimpse of variety of activities happening in the proteomics research in India, one published in Nature India and one in Journal of Proteomics. Some more special issues on the arrays in the Proteomics Journal, and one on the proteomics clinical application looking at the tropical and neglected diseases. So some of these, we can make you available to read, and will give you much more flavor to know that how these fields are really evolving strongly, and different type of applications have already come forward based on these proteomics resources. Last, I'd like to finish my presentation with this short clip of Joe Biden, who is now President of United States. In 2017, he visited HUPO meeting in Dublin, and where some of us had a good opportunity to meet him and attend his lecture in a gala dinner, which was planned in that event. And it was so nice to see his knowledge, understanding about precision medicine and proteogenomics field. And of course, it's very heart-touching speech, which is almost 45 minutes long. But I'm just going to show you 1 minute clip of addressing all of us who were sitting in that room, the proteomics scientists, what is the expectation of the leaders from the world are from us.
Not to hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, a tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. And I can't be with any more prominent group of people who may be responsible for making hope and history rhyme than all of you in this room today.
All right, so what he just said that if all of you sitting in this room, in this education day, in this initiative, if you cannot make the impact, who else will do that? So there is a good urge from the community for the scientists, working in this field of proteomics, proteogenomics, to take the challenge and try to contribute so that, the patients, the people, the public who is looking for different type of solutions could benefit from your innovations. I think that's all from my side for this presentation. Thank you very much for being very silent and listening to this presentation. I hope now you have some questions which I can take forward. Are there some questions on the chat box? Let me have a look.
Hello, Dr. Sanjeev. Thank you so much for wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
We have questions to you and Dr. Shrikant Tripoli. If you allow me to take the questions, then I'll read out the questions. You could answer it.
Sure. Dr. Shrikant, if you're also there, we can see which ones are relevant to us.
So Dr. Shrikant, you could also stay. Yeah. All right. So the first question that I see in a Q&A panel is from Afiq Khan. What are the guidelines or requirements by HUPO to prove the evidence of a missing proteins?
But I was muted. Yeah. So there are evolving guidelines from the HUPO, Human Proteome Organization. As you have seen that, you're looking at protein evidence, which is coming especially from the mass spectrometry type of instruments, to really look at the very stringent criteria of having long peptide length, 2 unique peptides, and those are being used for database searches. So if those evidences are not available, you only have some confirmation that the transcript is present, but you do not see that peptide in the mass spec. Those are still termed under the missing protein category, and you really want to provide the evidences that these peptides do exist for a given protein. Then only you can move them to the PE1 category. So that's where there are a series of instructions and guidelines which is evolving, that how you can convert a missing protein to the actual protein. But what is more interesting thought, which all of you should pay attention, that how to take efforts to really identify some of these missing protein by using more innovative methods, or by using more innovative sampling strategies, or looking at different ways of enriching the low abundant proteins, especially the complex protein from the various transmembrane proteins or olfactory receptors, some of those which are the most missing proteins. So those could be a great opportunity to explore.
All right. So the next question that we have from is Sauti Prasad. How should we proceed for screening of potent immunogenic proteins, MS-based, for development of vaccine against organisms like insect vectors, like mosquito, etc.?
Dr. Shrikant, you want to take this? Or?
Yeah, Sanjay, you can take, because you're working on.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so see, I think when you are getting many peptides, you have to look at also that which of those peptides are immunogenic peptides, right? So on one hand, you have certain bioinformatics softwares and algorithms to make predictions of which peptides are most immunogenic. Additionally, if you are looking at, let's say, more proteogenomics approaches, you can do both exome sequencing as well as the peptide data generation, and look at the MHC enrichment of these peptidome to look at now, you have a set of peptides which are enriched from the MSC antibodies. And now can you look at those to find out which are the most immunogenic peptides? So there are different approaches being used. This is a very interesting question, which actually is not very easy to answer as well, because given that you need set of guidelines to starting from bioinformatics to the experimental level proving, and if we can narrow those down, then I think the entire vaccine search can be very easy, which is not so straightforward. So you come up with large number of potential immunogenic peptides. You have to do a lot of experimental testing to then narrow it down.
Sure. And then the last question is from Mr. Pramod on the Q&A. Then I'll move to the chat. How far the proteomics technologies are in support of precision diagnosis and therapy?
All right, Dr. Shrikant.
Yeah, so it's a very good question, but yes, the lot of work is going in the medical and the proteomic assays using the mass spectrometry and other approaches to go for the lab to the bench. So still we are not able to reach, but yes, there are some candidate markers which are really useful. The work is still going on. Definitely we can come someday to the precision medicine using these approaches.
Right. So just to add to that, I think, as Dr. Shrikant mentioned, it is a long journey. The way, extensive experiments has to be performed for biomarker discovery type of approaches. And then, after a series of validation strategy, then only you can go to make a claim with the FDA that now this is a biomarker for that test. But it's so, happy news to share that there are a series of biomarkers which are getting approved from FDA. There are a set of tests now, which is Roma, for example, for ovarian cancer, ProPCA for prostate cancer. Series of now tests are coming, which have been only derived from the mass spectrometry data. And there are even just peptide-based tests for looking at thyroid cancer, like thyroglobulin peptides, which can detect those. So now, the hard work over the years of proteomic scientists has started coming, giving some fruits to it. And now we see a large number of biomarkers are getting approved from FDA, and many type of tests are coming out from mass spec, not only just from the proteomics, but also even mass spec based other search for other tests from the metabolomics also are getting approved. So all those are not possible without doing these kind of extensive experiments.
Okay, and thank you. There's another question to Dr. Shrikant. In orbit trap method, you had mentioned that waves are used to trap the ions for analysis. On what basis do we decide what kind of waves or what headset to use for the analysis?
Yeah, good question. But so that will take care by the whatever the software, whatever the parameters already there in instrument. Okay, what we need to do is we need to define the what mass range we need to scan it. So once we define, when we say that we want to analyze the 400 to 2000 mark rate generally for the peptide, so that automatically the instrument will take care about what RF we need to do, what the voltage potential it has to do. It will take care and it will automatically optimize the parameter with it according to the range what we have given. So that user need not worry about the what how much we have to do, how we have to optimize the how many aids we need to optimize for the each mass.
All right, and there's one question, the last question that we would take because we are 11:05. What should be a practical MS-based approach to analyze differential protein expression in treated or untreated cancer cells in culture? How reliable and efficient MS-based approach would be? Do we really get some genuine data out of it, given that most of students are involved in the field of MS-based proteomics?
Dr. Shrikant can take it.
Yes, so the mass spec based quantitative protein now become very much reliable. Okay, but only the question is, yes, once we identify the whatever the differential regulator proteins are candidate, one has to validate using the conventional approaches like Guillain-Barré, ELISA. These mass spec is a mass spec based quantitative protein is a global protein, so where we can come up with the targets of the candidate proteins. So definitely it's reliable, but definitely we need to again validate with the conventional techniques. Okay, that is very important to make sure that the target and make sure to understanding the mechanistic level of that particular protein.
Dr. Shrikant has already showed you that how you can take breast cancer, for example, as an example case study, and use different type of approaches from the gels to looking at eye track to the level free quantification. All those are ways forward. Of course, depending on the sample numbers, the kind of question which you are addressing, I hope this end of the day in the education day, you will be better educated to make a decision yourself that what should be best experimental approach which you should be taking forward. But of course, we'll be happy to take more discussion in the end, in the evening slot.
Okay, and this is the last question from Gaurang again. Also in ESI-MS, will the using solvent play any role in changing the property of the sample?
Yeah, generally in the electrosplanation, we use the three solvents: water, acetonitrile, as well as the methanol. These are protic solvents. Okay, so that solvents will help to ionize the molecules. Okay, so generally the ionization will occur with the protonation or the deprotonation, but it will not change anything. The modify or derivatives it may not do. These are the protic solvent. Maximum it can either protonate or the deprotonate. So that will help to ionize the molecules. But definitely in electroionization, if you use any detergent or apart from these solvent, if any other solvent, it is going to again affect in the not only sample, it is going to affect your technology also. It will clog the column. Okay, so many other things can happen.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Srikanth and Dr. Sanjeev. I think we are coming to the end of the questions that we had for the session 1. We have a short break now till 11.
Actually, sorry, there was a few small points which I wanted to discuss, which was we had planned for 10:45 to 11.